Hello, everyone, and welcome to Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where having a rowing coach only makes you better. Following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident rower who is respected by your peers. Become the athlete you want to row with. I'm Marlene Royle, and this week Rebecca Caroe is away, so I will be your host for this episode of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. Please share the live stream with your social media account, as this helps bring us new listeners. And for our live listeners, please tell us where you're joining from and write in the comments below the live stream. First, we'll have a message from our sponsors. The sponsor of today's podcast is U.S. Rowing Masters Conference. This is a conference just for masters. U.S. Rowing is hosting a one-day event focused on Masters-specific educational content. It is designed for both Masters athletes and coaches. Run virtually, it's on Saturday, that's this coming Saturday, April 2nd. The world's first event runs at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, U.S., and goes through 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. The leading speakers are covering club management, practical skills, wellness. Myself and Rebecca, we are both speaking at 4:30 Eastern Time. They have two tracks running at the same time. My topic is Age Well, Row Well, where I'm going to do a big overview of how do we combine biomechanics, rigging, aging, joint protection, technique, drills, injury prevention. How do we roll this all up into one ball so that we are rowing well and aging well and continuing to perform the best that we can? Because remember, the first way to go faster is to learn how not to slow down. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Rebecca is going to be talking about how to manage a master club, but there's other really, really great topics coming up among ours, of course. And the keynote speaker is going to be Dr. Steven Sealer, and he's going to talk about appropriate training for masters athletes, which you definitely want to sign into that talk. Then we're going to hear about transitioning masters from Learn to Row to members. Jim Dietz and Mark Wilson of All American Rowing. They're going to talk about the boat, the oars, and you, how to set yourself up for comfort and efficient sculling. There's going to be some talks about how to structure your training program, how to use data effectively. Liz Foucault, who does a lot of work for U.S. Rowing, is a nutritionist, and she's going to talk about nutrition and hydration for masters athletes, how to retain masters athletes. Will Ruth and Blake Gorley are going to do a presentation on strength training for masters athletes. Rebecca and I are both talking at the same time. We follow up Ruth and Gorley. Keep in mind that if you register for the conference, everything will be recorded. So if you catch it live, that's great, but you can access everything afterwards as well. And the day concludes with Mark Novak, who's the physical therapist for the U.S. team, and he's going to talk about prehab for masters athletes. Now, there are three different types of tickets available, and I will put up here in the link to find the conference on the U.S. Rowing website. There are three different types of tickets. The individual conference pass is $79. This gets you full access to all the live sessions, and it's intended for one person. There's a boathouse pass, which is $299, which is intended for an entire boathouse to gain access to the conference, to have access to the live sessions and the recordings. And then there's an individual conference pass with championship membership for $129. And I believe that you do not have to be a U.S. Rowing member to join the conference. So anyone who is outside of US rowing, please take a look and earmark Saturday, April 2nd for your conference day. I think it's coming up. It's going to be a really, really great event for us. Now, this podcast wouldn't be possible, obviously, without your help. If you enjoy listening to Faster Masters Rowing Radio and you would like to support the show, you may support the show with a donation starting at $1. And just go to fastermastersrowing.com/podcast, and you can put in your donation there. And we certainly appreciate it. It definitely helps cover some of the costs of putting on the podcast every week for you. Now, today we have a guest from Casper, Wyoming. Hey, welcome. I'm glad to see you. Nice to have you here. And we're going to be talking about an article that Rebecca wrote recently, and it was posted in the online magazine called British Rowing Plus. And what I am going to do today is I'm going to read the article because there was some really good content in this article that we wanted to put out to our listeners. And also it gives you an example of some of the things that Rebecca and I are doing when we're offline or off the air in order to help promote masters rowing and help further masters rowing training along. And we have a listener from Wellington, New Zealand. We can't see your name because you're listed as a Facebook user, but nice to have you here. And here we go. Rebecca's article is called Goals and Measuring Training for Masters. And I'm going to read what it's all about. I think there's some really good tips here, and hopefully they'll help you get back on the water, get training, enjoy your training, think a bit about it, your training, what you would like to do. So I'm just going to read from the article. How can you improve your rowing? Rebecca Caroe, who runs Faster Masters Rowing training and education programs, shares her top tips in our latest article in the Masters series. And this was on British Rowing Plus, and the link is here in the banner below. Much of the satisfaction gained from rowing comes from measuring progress. Whether you are a recreational athlete or a top-level master competing international, we humans like to track our direction of travel. Well, what goals could I have? There are two types of goals: process goals and measured achievement goals. First, process goals include both objective and subjective aspects. These could be keeping my blades longer in the water or making specific technique improvements. Mental training can also include goals such as not allowing yourself to quit during an erg or arriving at the boathouse before the outing time so that you can do a dynamic warm-up. Second, objective goals are measurable, such as a time distance workout. Olympic gold medalist Brad Allen Lewis wrote a book, Lido for Time, as he tracked his time rowing around Lido Isle in Newport Beach, California. Other objectives include accountability, like a chart of the number of times that you train each week. If you race, you will want to plan your rowing season. This involves choosing one big winter and one big summer race event. Typically, these will be a head race in winter or fall and side-by-side racing in the summer. These goals require a peak performance for the race, and your training program will need to reflect the race date and include a progressive training taper for 10 to 14 days beforehand. If you want to learn more about writing peaking programs, the book Consistent Winning is a core text, and I highly recommend that. That's a book I discovered many, many years ago, and it's been very instrumental in some of my coaching and programming. Jared Day is a racing master at Buffalo Rowing Club in Eastern Cape, South Africa, who takes his short, medium, and long-term performance goals and factors them into his training regime and his meal plan. He is training for the World Rowing Coastal Championships and Saundersfoot Wales this year. As a recreational rower, your goals probably won't necessitate adjusting your training program to the same extent, but they do require focus and measurement. No goal is worth having if you cannot track progress towards it. And I second that, Rebecca, absolutely. You have to know what success is or how you define success. And in order to do that, you need to track it so that you have some way to know, are you moving closer to what your ideal is? Elizabeth Burt of Riverfront Rowing in Hartford, Connecticut agrees. She says, since the pandemic, I've only sculled and came to the realization that what I love to do is just long rows on the Connecticut River and not worry about meters or stroke rate. I push myself to get a good workout, but I stopped keeping track of the metrics. And isn't it so important? And we have a listener from Wilmington, North Carolina. She says, let's get some good goals. I agree with you. That must be Daphne. Absolutely. Goals are, excuse me, very, very important on one hand, but goals don't have to be strict. They can be measurable, but as I said, what you have to look at is what defines success for you, and what helps you know that you're moving in the right direction. That's really what's important to us. So, personal goals could include improved fitness, weight loss, or acquiring blade work skills. For these, you also need to understand what will help you move towards your goal. Will you need longer or more intensive training to get fitter, or gym work using weights to counter osteoporosis? Blade work skill is acquired through drill and exercises, and then testing yourself as you increase stroke rates and pressures. So choose good drills and get yourself videoed doing a few strokes so you can see actually what's going on when you're rowing. And we have a hello from Linda Jacobson Thornton from Fort Worth, Texas. And love the picture, Linda. This is excellent. Good to have you with us. And whatever goals you choose, write them down and put a diary note to retest or reassess your progress every 6 weeks through the year. And to some of our listeners out there, now, do you struggle to set goals? How do you set goals? If you have questions or comments, put them in our comments, and let's talk about them while we have some time here on the podcast. Moving on, Trafford Rowing Club's Susie Lotus, and Susie was a guest on our Faster Masters Rowing Radio just a couple of episodes ago, so we definitely encourage you to check out that podcast with Susie. Trafford Rowing Club's Susie Lotus is vice captain for the recreational squad. This group is made up of everyone who does not want to race, hear that, guys, does not want to race, or can't commit to the racing squad's training plans or formal racing. Yet, they still race in the Northwest of England Explorer Series, where crews visit different clubs in the region and race with others, and the host clubs provide the boats. So that's a really, really fun format. If you're not able to commit to a full-on training program and racing schedule, you can still organize with clubs around you to go have scrimmage races and go, have fun time trials or fun challenges. And the tradition here in the Northwest series is that you go and you visit a club. The club provides the boats. You have a great outing. You do some races. You enjoy yourself, and then you can go home, and you don't have to deal with trailering boats and rigging and all of these types of things, but you can have a great day and get to know the people who row in your clubs in other areas. Susie explains, the event series is aimed at post-learn to row crews, adaptive crews, and those who don't want to race. Our goals are to explore more of the Bridgewater Canal and race the Explorer Series in stable coxed quads These races involve crews of 5 to 8 people. We do 5 sprints over approximately 500 meters on the day, and the cake afterwards is compulsory. I don't think you ever talk about a rowing regatta without some element of food. So, ways to measure your rowing. Hello, Jeanette from Dundas, Ontario. Ways to measure rowing. Tony Tiku of Poriro Rowing Club in New Zealand uses a Garmin watch, which he trains with on the water, and a Sensei app and the Concept 2 monitor for his land-based rowing machine workouts. By contrast, James Holmes Seidel of Putney Town Rowing Club uses data goals on the water for the Masters women's squad he coaches at Putney Town Rowing Club. One session he likes is to set a 500-meter sprint from a 200-meter piece. So you get that, guys, you row 250 meters, then you have to take that time and try to go for 500 meters. So one session he likes to set is a 500-meter split from a 250-meter piece. And then he gets the crew to achieve the same split for 500 meters, 750 meters, and 1K during the same outing. That sounds pretty tough to me. He confesses that his squad laughs at the amount of data he collects, and he explains, if I make a rigging change or a technique change, data is really the only way to know if it was worth it. Since masters are training over the very long term, I like to describe myself as a lifer. Now remember, this is Rebecca's article here. So Rebecca's describing herself as a lifer. There will be times when we do less or more rowing. It's important to come back into training slowly, to be gentle on your body, because even a week off for a holiday means masters cannot just get back in the boat and do the same distance or the same time on the water that they could beforehand. Yes, transitions are a bit harder for us as we get older, but that's one of the reasons why we push home the idea of being consistent. Consistency is key to maintenance. As a result, goals need to be recalibrated and expectations managed, which can be easier said than done. Remember, these are Rebecca's words. She knows what he's talking about. So please join the discussion. Tell us what your goals are, and how do you, to our listeners now, how do you track progress, and what are your goals for this season? At the end of the article, Rebecca offers us some resources and rowing measurement suggestions that we can take advantage of. So measuring training can be done in many different ways. Here are some ideas. An app or a speed coach will track boat speed, distance, and rate. You can download your data and use the website rowsandall.com. That's ROWSANDALL.com to analyze your workouts. Distance moved per stroke, or meters per stroke at rate 18, is a good measure of your base steady paddling speed. So even if you're not racing, this is still something that can help you measure, are you getting better during the season? So if you're rowing rate 18 and you see that you're traveling more distance per stroke, more meters per stroke, or you row 18 for 30 minutes and you're going farther, then you know that you're getting better, as long as it's not related to current. Another way is a 20-minute erg test. Of course, this is my favorite. We'll measure your fitness progress, and retesting can be done monthly. This test also allows you to set your training performance categories for training. So we talk about these tests in the Faster5, in our fitness assessment, which is on fastermastersrowing.com. And the 20-minute test gives you a very good reading of what you can use as a basis to determine your performance paces. So you take the average of your 20-minute test, and from that we derive 6 different category paces. And depending on what the workout is, you know, for that particular intensity, for that particular goal of the workout, that this is the exact speed range that you should be targeting. And it helps you a lot because it makes sure that you train slow enough when you're supposed to train low enough, and it makes sure that you train hard enough when you're supposed to train high enough. And it's a very good way. So again, these are in the Faster5 Fitness Assessment, which you can find on fastermastersrowing.com in our product section. And if you do subscribe to one of our regular subscriptions, the Faster5 is included in your membership subscription. Heart rate is not a good measure of training intensity, but has its uses. Um, you can listen to more on this. Rebecca and I did talk about the benefits, or I would say the advantages and disadvantages of using heart rate in a podcast a couple of weeks ago. And heart rate just has so many variabilities. If you're fatigued, if you're dehydrated, if you're training in a hot environment, um, your heart rate is going to be higher than usual. If you look at your heart rate as intensity, you have to correlate to something. So you have to go into a physiological lab or have a lactate test and know what your maximum heart rate is, or what your markers are at anaerobic threshold and aerobic threshold, in order to know what the heart rate means. And it's perfectly fine to do that, but you know that you have to regularly do a blood test with that in order to know what those measurements are, and you have to retest them every couple of months, because your fitness changes, and as your fitness changes, your markers are going to change. So doing a 20-minute erg test actually gives you quite accurate information, and you can bypass the whole testing of the blood finger test for lactate if you would like to. Another way to measure training might be to row set distances regularly as time trials at fixed stroke rates. Record your time and the weather conditions. I like these types of sessions, and I use these sessions quite a bit. Some of my favorites are stroke rate 22 for 30 minutes, and you measure your distance. You repeat that for 4 to 6 weeks, and from week to week you want to see what your progress is. So it helps you develop some stroke efficiency, see how far you're pushing the boat. You could also do that at stroke rate 24. You can manipulate these variables depending what you like, but it's a nice way to measure progress, measure distance without feeling like it's an all-out kind of trial situation. And the goal is to row better and move the boat farther at a set stroke rate. You can also row a set time and simply record the distance. So if you're on the water, I would say that's my 20 minutes. That's our 20 minutes on the erg. You can measure the overall distance. You can focus on improving your average split. So those are some of the tips for our more competitive masters. If you are a non-racing masters, here's some things that you can do to set some goals, and again, add a little bit of measurement into your training, just to make sure that you know that things are moving in the right direction. You can do a time trial over a local course and just see how far you go, right? Do you have a set home course? I like to have set home courses. If you've got a set home course, for example, you row from here to that buoy and back, and at the beginning of the season that took you 15 minutes, and then you do that course again, and maybe maybe you get it down to 12 minutes by the end of the season. That could be a home course where you're just saying, I'm going to go around the island, or something like that is a typical course you like to do, and you can measure that from week to week, or whenever you're inspired to do it, when you have perfect water conditions. We have a question here from Mustang Chef. So at what intensity do you row the 20-minute? 50% pain, 75%, 95% pain. Okay, great question. And I will answer it as honestly as I can. Um, it's a test. So with that said, um, you want to row the best effort that you can on the day. So in an ideal world, if it's a test, you're cooked by the last stroke. That's it. Like you can get to the last stroke, but that's it. There's nothing left in the tank at the end. However, it is a 20-minute test. So obviously you can't row 100% every single stroke. Max, 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 max. Okay. So at a 20-minute test, you have to figure out where your point is to manage the best average split that you can. The ideal is to zero in on the best average split that you can and sit on it and be able to hold that the whole time. If it's that's kind of a measure of your anaerobic threshold. So from a 100% effort, you're probably going to be about, I would guess like 80, 85%, 85 to 90%, depending on how fit you are. But the goal in the beginning is try to establish the best average pace that you can. If you've never done this before, you might have to try it a few different times. Like for example, you pick a split, and I'm going to say you pick 215. You think you can do 215. You start at 215, and you get 5 minutes into this and you just realize, oh boy, that's just too fast for what I can do right now. I would just row out your workout. Don't consider that that's really going to be your 20-minute test anymore. Row out, do something else, come back to it again in a few days. And if you felt 215 for your first one was too fast, try 217 and start, warm up, start rowing 217. And you want something that's challenging, comfortably hard. Like you have to concentrate on this. However, you want to be able to try to hold this for the duration of 20 minutes. So if you come back to it again on a second attempt, try 217. And if you can hold that, and you might have to concentrate on it and really focus on it. But if you can hold that, then go with it. If you find that you're blowing up really badly midway through, then again, that pace was probably too fast for you to start at. Wait a few days, try it again, readjust. Okay, so sometimes when you're doing the first one, and you can also do the same thing on the water, but sometimes when you're doing the first one, you don't really know where you're at. So you might have to try it a few times. So I would say that the initial goal is a split that you can hold, or you can even increase a little bit during the piece. But if you see that you're like really starting to fade and lose it, then you probably over challenge yourself. But once you zero in on a split that's pretty manageable, you want to be able to stay on that red line, and push it all the way to the end. You want to be pretty well done by the time you get to the end of the 20 minutes, because you want to feel like that was an honest reading of what your capacity is on a given day. So I hope that helps. It's a lot of work. But getting a good reading on what your fitness is does help you train at very accurate training paces, and that becomes very important to prevent overtraining and make sure that your progress is moving in the direction that you want it to during the season. So thank you for the question. Some tips for our non-racing masters. Um, again, we talked about do a time trial over your local course. Island to island, buoy to buoy, lap the lake, and stay on a certain course, and then have that as a club row, for example. Another goal, how many technical goals, how many strokes can you row with your blades off the water? That's a performance goal. I think we could all probably benefit from that. Um, how endurance, what distance can you row before you need to take a break, right? So maybe when you first started rowing, you weren't in very good shape and, you rowed for 2 minutes and you stopped, and then you rowed for 5 minutes and then you stopped, and then you worked up to the point that you could row 25 minutes before you stopped. Those are all little measures of progress that, tell us that things are moving in the right direction. Try to row with fewer breaks or chatter. I'm not a fan of talking in the boat, and when I row a single, I don't have anybody to talk to. However, in team boats, it can be sometimes, people like to chat a lot. Um, the more you can row longer, the more you're breathing, listen to your breathing. This is what we call the talk test. You can judge how hard you're working by whether it's easy for you to breathe. Can you breathe through your nose? Can you breathe through your mouth? Um, Try coxing. That's another performance goal for a non-racing master. Can you steer the best possible course through a bridge or along a riverbank without oversteering? If you're normally a sweep rower, learn to scull or learn to row the opposite sides. These are all ways to expand your skills and increase your enjoyment. So, this was Rebecca's article that was in British Rowing Plus. It's currently online, and the link will be in the show notes. So, if you'd like a copy of it, you can go there. And we'd love to hear from you. And if anyone else has any training questions, what are your big goals, or how do you address rowing time trials? Do you have the same nerves like you do the night before a race, or do you just get up and do it, and you know what you're going to do? Everybody approaches time trials differently, but the I think the important message in Rebecca's article was measure your training in some way. It can be dependent on what works for you. Um, and there are things like um, really simple tools that don't require any devices. There is the rate of perceived exertion scale. So perhaps we take one of these examples that you go out and you row stroke rate 18, and pretty firm pressure, moving right along. You see how many meters per stroke you're moving the boat. And another way that you could pay attention to this is, I rode 30 minutes at stroke rate 18, and when I first started the season, that felt like, on a scale of 1 to 10, that felt pretty hard to me. That felt like a 7. And then as you get fitter and you move into the season, you might say, "Hey, rowing 30 minutes at 18, you know what? Now that feels like a 5 to me." That's also a measure of improvement, because that's your perceived effort rating. So if you felt that when you first started, you weren't in very good shape and that was a 7, and now you can do the same thing and that feels like a 5, then you know that you've gained some fitness here. And so those are way to look at, you know, how do you gather small wins? Training is all about adding up the little wins, and having small ways to measure, having ways to set goals. Um, you could, you know, uh, look at, how do you have to adjust your habits? If you always had a habit of getting to the boathouse right on time, and you want to start a new habit of getting to the boathouse 5 minutes beforehand, maybe you need to think about your morning routine and getting up a little bit earlier, or allowing, if you really like to have your coffee and your muffin in the morning before you go row, don't crowd your morning. Get up in time, allow yourself to gain some composure in the beginning of the day. And if that means, getting up a little bit earlier and taking a bit more time before you jump into your day, then it's worth it, because it's going to reflect in the rest of the day. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for being with us today. We have Linda from Fort Worth, Jeanette from Ontario. Mustang Chef is coming to us from Michigan. Still cold up there in Michigan right now. And Casper, Wyoming, and Wellington, New Zealand. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. This has been another edition of Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where having a rowing coach only makes you better. Following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident rower who is respected by your peers. Become the athlete that you want to row with. And thank you, everyone. And enjoy your week. Enjoy your spring. And I'm going to stop for a moment. We do have a question. Fitness evaluations have become less anxiety-inducing over time, Jeanette tells us. After a few years, I no longer stress about them most of the time. And that's a good point, Jeanette, because it's about practice. And I think when you include tests on a frequent basis, they become more familiar and you have a routine of how to approach those tests. And if you avoid them for months and months and months, there's a lot of resistance to getting started. If you do them on a regular basis, they're part of your practice, and making it part of a practice is really important. And I'm going to jump in here to Mustang Chef says Lance Armstrong developed a high pedal rate to conserve energy, especially on hills. Is it better to row a higher number stroke rate with less pressure? It depends. I would say this is where rigging comes in, gearing comes in, and your physiology comes in. Because depending on, there are people who like to row low with a bit heavier load and a little bit lower stroke rate, and they find that's more efficient from their physiology. There are other people that like slightly higher turnover, or we can do the same thing on the erg. They like slightly higher turnover. They like to load slightly higher rating. That works better for them. My answer would be experiment with time trials. Experiment, for example, in your boat, try different rigging adjustments. And we have in our rigging webinar on Faster Masters Rowing, Volker Nolte goes into oar settings and how to adjust oars and actually experiment with that in quite a lot of detail. But you have to try this according to your rigging or your drag and your particular physiology and see what works, because it depends on your stroke length in the water, depends on the conditions, headwind, tailwind. So there are a lot of factors, but there will be one stroke rate range where you're going to see that you really feel more efficient at that rating, and it's easier for you to maintain that rating at your given race pace over a longer period of time. So this is where time trials play a really important role, so that you can measure your rate of perceived exertion. You can measure your results. You can feel how you felt the boat move and what was effective, because there is no right or wrong. It's going to be what works best for you and what helps you maintain the best momentum. So I hope that helps, and we'll be talking more as the season progresses. And I'd like to thank Jeanette and Mustang Chef Linda and everyone. And this is Marlene Royle, and I'm signing off for myself and Rebecca and this edition of Faster Masters Rowing Radio. So thank you, everyone, and have a great week. Enjoy your spring.